From time to time, we all need a bit of a change of scenery, don't we? Hello and welcome to my channel. And no, I'm not talking about going away. I'm talking about simply me filming from a different room today. And that's because I shamelessly want to show off the photographs that you can see behind me, which have been framed and which have been taken by my very talented friend. I'm so excited because they finally have been hung on the wall in my office. And whenever I look at them, they just calm me down so much because they pictures of trees and they have these wonderful muted greens and blues and greys and blacks. So yes, welcome to my office. I feel like I have had a chance to notice the change of the seasons and enjoy it. On top of it, I also read some fantastic books. I potentially discovered a new favorite author, so we have a lot to talk about today. Let's dive in. The first book I read in September was this one, titled Olga by Bernhard Schlink, translated from German by Charlotte Collins. This was a completely random pick when I was visiting one of my local libraries, and wow. Remember when I mentioned a new favorite author? Well, this is him. So you may know him because the film that was based on his book, The Reader, was Oscar nominated, and I think in fact Kate Winslet received an Oscar for her main role in that movie. And I did watch that movie some years back, but I remember feeling very strange about it. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be thinking about it, and up until now I certainly haven't read anything by Bernhard Schlink. But I am so glad that I found this in the library because I can't tell you how masterfully captivating Schlink's writing is. So this is a story following Olga, this very young woman. Actually, we follow her from childhood, living in 19th century Prussia up until what is now a modern Germany. And she's an orphan living with her grandmother. She moves quite a lot in her life across Germany for various reasons. There is a bit of a central theme here around her love for this aristocrat that kind of binds the whole novel together. However, what really is super interesting about this story is Olga herself. She's this, on the face of it, very quiet character, but she's very ambitious. She knows herself. She has a very interesting approach to life. And the way this is written, this is so engrossing because on the face of it, the novel is fairly quiet, but the plot does sneak up on you, and actually there are quite a few things happening because you follow Olga over many years. But the narration here, oh, so interesting. You don't know who the narrator is until the second part when it's suddenly revealed, and it is done so well. And then in the third part, it's mostly letters. But I don't want to say too much to you about this. I'm not sure if all of his novels are as good as this, but I will definitely going to be reading his other novels. So quiet and so captivating. Also, if you like the type of narration where you've got very short chapters, which I absolutely adore because there seems to be a very good rhythm to this book. And you know, I was wondering whether I'm a little bit biased when it comes to this book because this is set in Prussia in 19th century, so we need to remember that Poland as a country didn't exist then, and the book starts with Olga living in Wrocław, which is now the western side of Poland, which at that time belonged to Germany. And the Wrocław actually is the city where I went to university, so it was very fascinating to read about the city, which you know, wasn't returned to Poland until after WW2. And I have never thought much about all these German families who would have lived in Wrocław for many generations, having to move out of Wrocław in 1945 and go back to Germany, and how disruptive that would have been. But I don't want you to think this is a political novel. This is not a political novel. And I think this is where the craft of the author really comes in, because he does probe the German history, mainly through the characters, but he does it without any justification or judgment. It's just so well done and also so captivating at the same time. I highly recommend this book, and like I said, my new favorite author because of what he did with the main character. I have a feeling that Olga, in the hands of any other author, wouldn't come through the way she comes through here. And honestly, on one hand, I would love to see a movie based on this book, but then on another hand, I'm not sure if it's possible to translate what's in this book, that character, onto the big screen. Next, I read my first Hardy, which was the Mayor of Casterbridge. I was so surprised to see how fast-paced this book was. I was preparing myself for these long descriptions of nature, and yes, you get that as well. But in terms of the plot, this has a similar feel to a play where you've got so many things happening so fast, and yes, you do have to approach it with a bit of a suspended belief because there are a hell of a lot of convenient coincidences in this book, but you don't really dwell on them. You instead enjoy the ride, and you kind of are really interested to see what is this author going to do next. Where is he going to take this story? So we are in West Sussex in 19th century England, and we follow Michael Henchard, who is the main character of this novel. And one day he gets very drunk at a fair, and he basically auctions his wife and a child, and he sells them to the highest bidder. Now, if this sounds strange to you, it should, and it definitely sounded strange to me. However, after I read the introduction, I understand now that this wasn't such an unusual event in those days, and Thomas Hardy learned about this from a local newspaper, I think. And so he very cleverly used that idea to put it in the beginning of his novel. And I promise you, this is not a spoiler. This is literally what you read on page 1 to 10. Then we skip 18 years and we start to follow Michael Henchard 18 years later and his life, into which this wife that he sold to another man reappears in his life. And in terms of the plot, that's all I'm going to tell you because I don't want to spoil it. This is actually, despite some of the language being maybe a little bit archaic, very easy to read. What I can tell you is that this is definitely set up as a tragedy. And like in any tragedy, I think the idea was that you're supposed to hate the main character, but actually, of course, like in any tragedy, things are not that simple. Now, I'm not sure if that worked with me in the sense that I did hate the main character from the beginning to the end. And I couldn't really see past that. But there's a very, very good video by Kristin and the Classics dedicated just to this novel. If you want to understand a bit more about the, especially analysis of the main character and what Thomas Hardy was trying to do, showing us this concept of determinism, whether we determined and predestined by our character or whether, you know, we have some influence over our lives. Also, there is a theme of this old life versus new life. There is a great portrayal of country life in 19th century rural England. But overall, this is really a study of a character. And yes, there's a lots of plot, but all of that is there to achieve putting certain questions to a reader. And the characters are very, very well described. I would say Elizabeth Jane, who is the daughter of Michael Henchard, is probably the least satisfying character. I thought she was maybe a little bit too underdeveloped. However, I did really like Lucetta's character, who is another female character in this story. I really don't want to spoil too much. I will definitely be reading more Hardy because I enjoy that. And now the question is, which novel to read next. Maybe you can help me answer that question. For the next book I read in September, we have non-fiction. This is The Secret Painter by Jo Tucker. I saw this book in a local bookstore and I was intrigued by it. And I immediately reserved it in the local library. And honestly, I was blown away by how much I enjoyed it. This is a great read or great gift for someone who loves a story about an underdog, who is interested in art, who is an introvert, who has a secret hobby. But also, this is a perfectly enjoyable book that I am very confident to recommend to anyone. So, Jo Tucker is a nephew of Eric Tucker, a painter who lived all his life in north of England, in Warrington, and he was this most unassuming man. He lived all his life with his mother on a council estate, always shambolically dressed. There is a very funny story in there about one family member who was trying to buy him a belt for his trousers because he was wearing a rope, and Eric Tucker just said, "No, why? What's wrong with this rope? It works perfectly fine." You get the picture. By unassuming, I mean, he spent most of his working life working as a miner or on the construction site as a hobby. He was into a bit of a boxing, but because of his arthritis, he had to stop working in his 50s. And so he just spent this very quiet life living with his mother, with the only entertainment being going to bookies once a week. And what happened was, after his death, his family have uncovered over 500 paintings that he stashed in his rooms somewhere. Obviously, his family had an idea that he was interested in painting, but they had no idea to which extent he was pursuing his hobby. And so after his death, this nephew, by way of a homage to his uncle, is trying to put this exhibition together. And with that comes him investigating his life a bit more. And I think it's fascinating because it's really not just about this one man living in Warrington, but also a portrayal of all of the North England, which is very different to the south of England. And also, there are some deeper questions here. For example, why do we humans create art? Is it just to make a living? Is it to make money? No, clearly, Eric Tucker has not made a penny from his painting all his life, and he never stopped painting. So I guess the answer here is we create art because we're trying to make sense of life. It is an extremely compelling and touching memoir. Now, let's talk about this giant baby of a book. I stumbled across The Thorn Birds by Colleen McCullough while my family and I were in Croatia on holidays. We were staying in this Airbnb, and it became very quickly apparent we didn't bring enough paper books, as in I brought enough paper books, but my family kept stealing them from me to read them. And in the end, my son even stole my Kindle from me because he doesn't have his own Kindle. He wanted to read The Martian by Andy Weir because he's just finished Hail Mary. And so I gave him my Kindle and I was bookless. I couldn't believe it. So basically I scanned the shelves and the only book that really spoke to me was this one. And sorry, I should make it clear that actually it was this paperback that I found in the Airbnb. It's just the font here was so small that after returning to the UK, I got myself a hardback. So yes, I was completely hooked to the point where I sacrificed Tom Lake by Anne Patchett as a replacement book to leave in the Airbnb, and the owner very kindly agreed for the swap, so that's what I did. For the context, this was written in 1977, or at least published in 1977. I'm sure it was written over several years because this is a huge book. It was so popular at the time that just a few years later, in 1983, it was turned into a very also popular TV miniseries. And at that point, I was 5 years old, and I vaguely remember this being talked about, and I vaguely remember that there was something spicy about it. But other than that, I didn't know much about this novel. So this novel spans many years. It starts in 1915, ends in 1969. So we in the beginning of the 20th century in outback Australia. That's where the novel is based, although it starts in New Zealand, but the majority of it happens in Australia. Towards the end, you also in Italy a bit and in London, but this book is really about Australia. The book is divided into different chapters dedicated to different characters. However, I would say that the whole story centers around Maggie, whom we meet as this 4-year-old girl, and we follow her life until she's in her 50s. And even in these chapters that are presumably dedicated to other characters, Maggie is this kind of a glue that holds this book together. The title, in case you're wondering, comes from a legend of a bird who basically spends his life looking for this tree with thorns, and when he finds that tree, he sits on it and sings the most beautiful song while impaled on that thorn of that tree, and while the bird is basically dying. And so this is a bit of a metaphor for us humans, you know, despite all the suffering that we know is going to come with just being alive and with loving others, we still decide to do it. This is a big family saga, and you've got a bunch of these vibrant characters, from stubborn patriarchs, ambitious priests, rebellious daughters. So you've got this character drama of various family dynamics, and this is all set with the background of Australian beautiful and very harsh sometimes landscape. And the results are that you are constantly engaged. Now, in terms of political correctness, I mean, this was written in 1977, so yes, maybe it's not 100% politically correct, because, you know, the main characters are white Irish Catholics, and they do believe in one way of living. But this is all done very gently, and obviously the main theme is romance. I'm sure you're probably aware of it, even if you haven't read this book, between a priest and Maggie, who is this girl we meet in the beginning of the novel. She's part of this massive family. She's the only daughter. There are several sons, I think 7 or 8 maybe even. And he meets her when she's 8 years old. Well, he's already an adult priest. Now, if that sounds sketchy to you, it really shouldn't, and you don't have to worry, because there's nothing creepy about how this was handled in this book. Instead, you've got a perfect portrayal of this connection between these two human beings. And of course, with so many characters, with so many things going on, you have loads of themes, lots of questions being asked, and I'm sure lots of essays could be written about things like, you know, our humans' connection to land. What does it mean to have a home? What does home mean? Is suffering necessary for growth? What's the impact of motherless upbringing, especially for a girl? And also the question of vows, whether these are religious vows or inter-relationship vows, you know, how binding they are, why do we have them, and are they really constructive to our way of living or not? The way of storytelling in here really clicked with me, because you have this perfect combo of reflections with plot and action and incredible passages about nature. Everything very well paced. And again, just like in The Mayor of Casterbridge, here you also very curious about where is the author going to take it next, because honestly some of the events in here were completely unforeseen by me. They blindsided blindsided me. And one more thing about storytelling, even the way the theme of love and the romance was handled here, I thought it was so nice and sensitively done. The sex scenes in this book, of which you get a few, are never really about the physical, but they more about the emotional. If you like multi-generational sagas with rich characters and very high emotional stakes, this will be for you. It really reminded me how I love reading sagas. In terms of recommending a similar book, I would say maybe Pachinko is coming quite close. I think if you read this and you enjoy this, you would also like Pachinko. And I also got a lot of recommendations from my lovely subscribers, and I will list all of these titles recommended by you in the description box below in case some of you want to check them out. I will definitely be reading them in, or at least some of them, in 2026. So thank you very much for those. I don't have a copy of the next book because I read my son's school copy. You heard it right. Basically, I read a book that my son is analyzing at school. It was a play by J.B. Priestley titled An Inspector Calls. He basically was talking a lot about this play, and so in the end I said to him, well, just give it to me, I'll read it so we can, dive a bit deeper into these discussions. And I did. It's a very short play. It was very interesting. It was written in 1945, but it was set in 1912 in England. The play itself is very fast-paced. It's a little bit like whodunit kind of story, but that play takes actually quite an unusual approach to your standard crime fiction, because you have this detective who interrupts a family dinner, and instead of trying to find out who committed a murder, you are following a story of a suicide of this young working class woman, and how potentially these family members were involved or influenced that girl committing suicide. There are some twists in there. It was good. It was very interesting. I do enjoy reading plays. However, if you compare it, for example, to Ibsen, whom I read this year, Ibsen also writes in a way where it's supposed to teach you some morals, but he does it in a way that makes you, a reader, ponder a bit and, think about some philosophical questions. In this one, in An Inspector Calls, the way this is done is very, very preachy, in a sense that, clearly the author has a very particular message. It is all spelled out for you in this play. There's nothing to think about, and, he's just telling you that's what you should be thinking, that's how it should be. And I'm not sure if I like it so much. I prefer when it's a bit more subtle. Nevertheless, it's sharp, engaging, almost, I would say, thrilling to read, and has a lot to say on the morality of the society at the time and on capitalism. And I can see why this is read at school, not least because I guess it teaches the students some critical thinking. And the final book of the month of September, which unfortunately I did not love. I had such high hopes for it because I loved the writing as soon as I started to read it. I loved the concept of this woman who escapes her busy, regular city life in Sydney and decides to move into a convent by way of trying to repair her broken heart. By broken heart, I don't mean broken by love, but broken by grief. But unfortunately, I really struggled to get through this book. I forced myself to finish it. I almost didn't finish it, but I kept hoping, maybe there will be some kind of revelation or resolution to all of these chapters, but no, there isn't. It feels like a memoir. You've got various anecdotes about her life before she moved to convent, in between kind of her living in the convent descriptions. And so I can see what the author was trying to do. She was trying to show us this connection and make us reflect about, what it means to be good. What is our relationship with Mother Earth and how we're treating her? What does it mean to love someone? Big questions, but I think it was the structure, well, not the structure, but it was the fact that these anecdotes, they were just like these snippets and none of them went deep enough for me. Very, very fragmented type of read, which kind of made me, whenever I read a chapter and put the book aside, it didn't made me crave going back to that book because it was irrelevant where I stopped or where I began. Also, there was a bit of gruesomeness that I felt wasn't entirely necessary. She refers to some stories of female saints and she describes the tortures, and there's also mice plague in this book because the convent is suffering from an invasion of mice. And again, there's a lots of gruesomeness. I get it. Sometimes it has to be there to kind of shock you and put perspective on things, but here I didn't get it. Maybe I have missed something. Let me know if you've read it. Unfortunately, as it stands, I can't recommend it as an engaging read. Having said that, I will not give up on Charlotte Wood, and I will read her other book called Weekend because I know she's a very well respected and appreciated author. So I want to make sure I'm giving her a proper chance. These are all of my September reads. Let me know in the comments what you've read and if you maybe also have discovered your new favorite author. Now it's time for the word of the month. So I try to, every month from the books that I've read, pick one word that I did not know before and analyze it a bit more and make sure that I use it in my everyday language. And the word is Saccor, spelled Succor. It is used in this sentence on page 90. Father Ralph had returned to succor his neglected parishioners. Now, according to Oxford Dictionary, succor means give assistance or aid to. It can also be a noun, which then it would mean assistance and support in times of hardship and distress. I have never heard this word before, and after doing some research online, it turns out that actually this is the word that is not used in modern language too much because it's fairly formal and archaic term, primarily appearing in literally religious or humanitarian context where it denotes assistance or relief in times of hardship. So it is very much still a legitimate word, and I'm sure if you used it, it would sound quite impressive. It's just not used as much these days. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you all of you 928 subscribers. I can't believe that number. I promise myself that if we ever get to 1,000 subscribers, the first thing I'm doing, apart from a litter giveaway for you, I am investing in a better microphone. I have a very basic microphone and I want to make sure that you guys have very good watching experience. That is my little resolution. Have a wonderful weekend, whatever you do, and a fantastic week. And as always, I will see you next Friday.